Hello world, welcome to a slightly different view of me today. This is being recorded on my iPhone. My poor iMac is very, very poorly at the moment and is awaiting attention. And hopefully it'll be back soon, but whatever, we're having to make do with an iPhone here. And I do want to still try and keep the flow of videos coming up to the channel, but yeah, they might just look a bit different, maybe not be quite the same sound quality either, but yeah. So the other morning, as I was doing some knitting, I put on an album which I've had in my collection for many years, since about 2003 2004. I'd read an article in, I think it was Hi-Fi Choice magazine. They were reviewing the P5 and the P7 at the time when those two were part of the range, and they were sort of brand newish. And I had a P3, and my P3 was new at the time, and I was really proud of it, whatever. But obviously, you always like to, if you're me, you're never satisfied with anything. And you think, well, what does the one above sound like? What does the one above that sound like, kind of thing? So yeah, I'd seen the two Riegas on the front cover of this Hi-Fi Choice magazine. I've still got it somewhere, but I can't find it, so whatever. And they were talking about this album, which I was playing the other morning, as I say, while I was doing some knitting. And it's the Keith Jarrett Köln concert. It's a single solo piano gig. It's jazz piano. It's really rather good. But in this magazine, they were talking about how much of a stress test it could be for any turntable. And to be fair to them, they only put it on the P7. At the time that Riga were manufacturing the P7, the highest cartridge that Riga made was the Exact. And the P7's tone arm, which I think was called the RB700 or something like that, was really sort of worth more than that. And so they had quite a high-end moving coil cartridge with it that probably cost as much as the record player did back in the day. Then they talked about how wonderful this album was coming through it, but saying that it was a stress test. And so obviously, me thinking, right, I've got a P3, which should be, exponentially at least an eighth of the quality of a P7. My P3 at the time, I think, had a bias or super bias cartridge on it, something like that. And I thought, let's get that album and see how good it sounds on my P3. And obviously, the first thing I noticed was that, I'd never heard of Keith Jarrett, never heard of the Köln concert at all. Didn't really know what I was letting myself in for, really, music-wise, and I was really pleased. It's a brilliant album. It's absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you more about that as we go along. And so in this video, I just wanted to explore why it's such a stress test and get you to hear it and, put it in your own collection, because it really should be there. The background to this gig goes that Keith Jarrett was a jazz pianist. His gigs were being organised by the youngest concert promoter then available. She was a German, or at least his gigs in Germany were sort of being organised, as I say, by this very, very young concert promoter. Her name, I think, was Vera Brandes. I think you'd say it something like that. She was only 18 at the time. And she'd organised this concert for him to play and be recorded at the Köln Opera House in what was then West Germany. We are going all the way back to January 1975 here. All right. Now, Keith had a gig, I think, on the same day as this concert. So this was like his second one. It was at 11:30 p.m. on, as I say, this January night in 1975. He travelled all day. She, the concert promoter, bless her, she'd organised a meal for him in a restaurant, but he had hardly any time to eat any of it before he was due to go on. To confound difficulties even further, he had requested a particular type of Bosendorfer piano, and the staff at the Opera House had misinterpreted what his wishes were. They did have a Bosendorfer piano. It was a rehearsal piano in one of the back rooms at the Opera House, one of the rehearsal rooms. It was knackered. It was only a baby grand piano. It was out of tune, and also it was very light in the bass notes as well, which would sort of come to bear on the style of his piano playing throughout the concert. This thing was wheeled onto the stage. The microphones and tape machines were set up for recording. It was tuned. Bless them, they did tune it. Concert promoter girl saw it, said, "Blimey, that's not what we asked for," and tried to get at least a similar piano to what he'd asked for. She did track one down to a venue not too far away. However, the owner of the piano was very reluctant to let it be moved because it was bad weather for a start, and moving it and then tuning it in a new place, whatever, at such short notice, because you have to, particularly if you do move a piano, you do have to sort of tune it very gently over time. Especially, the more that a piano gets out of tune, the more you have to sort of avoid sort of great big Yankee sort of turns on the pegs, because you are gonna break it. So you have to say, right, well, on the first tuning, it's gonna be slightly off, whatever. Give it a week or so. I'll come back and I'll tune it a little bit more, and over time it'll come up to pitch. There wasn't time to do all of that in time for the gig, and so the guy refused to let his piano go. So that meant that this knackered old thing had to be sort of brought into play. Keith Jarrett got to the venue and said, "No, I'm not doing it." He was persuaded by the fact that actually they'd set up the mics and stuff to make a good recording of him. Not making life any easier was the fact that this Keith Jarrett had suffered some kind of back injury, and his back was in a brace as well. So, we've got knackered piano, we've got knackered Keith Jarrett, we've got Keith Jarrett in pain as well, and, not really feeling it for doing this gig. However, just before the concert started, just to sort of tell everyone to kind of take your seats, please, and, stop eating your sweets and whatever, just quieten down. There was this. Which can just about be heard at the beginning of the recording. It's like this sort of bing bong from "Hello campers, hidey hi," that kind of thing. Basically telling people, right, shut up, whatever, it's about to start. And in the first few bars, Keith Jarrett imitated that little call. It raised some laughter from the audience, which kind of settled his nerves, kind of G'd him on a little bit. And, I say that about those first few notes because this concert is almost 100% improvised. Now, normally, I don't really like improvised music. It usually is a tool for someone to say, look at me, look how well I can play my instrument. I can play it really fast, whatever. This guy here can improvise a piece that has structure, that you know where it's going. There are no sort of great long piano cadenzas that you're never ever going to be able to sort of remember or sing back in your life. He uses sort of diatonic chords, so we're not challenged by sort of really bizarre sort of jazz sort of chords that are gonna, are they gonna sort of resolve or are they not? Whatever. It's very, very melodic. And according to the Wikipedia article, the first side of this, which is about sort of nearly 20 minutes long, I think, is really A minor 7 and G. So really, really simple. When he gets himself into a state where he's found a fantastic beat or a fantastic bit of melody, he'll start singing along. He'll start tapping his feet. He'll start whooping like, woo, like that. And, I think that little bit of laughter at the beginning of the album really sort of helped to dispel any kind of reservations that he would have about doing the gig. This has now gone down into sort of classic in the piano solo canon of music. It's really worth listening to. It's really worth listening to on vinyl. I listened to it just coming out of my iPad speakers the other day while I was sort of doing the Guardian crossword, fact fans, online, and it really sounded tinny and brittle, and I think partly that was due to the problems with the bass on the piano on the night, as it were. It's kind of doesn't sound as brittle and tinny on vinyl. It sounds as if the microphones were quite close to the piano in the way that everything was in the 70s. It was trendy, as you know from listening to all your Eagles and Fleetwood Mac albums. It's a very close sounding record. Okay, it does pick up the strings and things like that, rattly floorboards, anything like that, you can hear it all. It is slightly on the compressed side. It's a poppy kind of piano album in that sense. It's not brick-walled compressed. It's just compressed enough so that the quiet passages, although you can hear that they're quiet, they're not really quite so quiet as they would be perhaps on a purely classical recording. If he'd been playing a piano sonata or something, you would get those PPPs. There are some parts, there's a bit that goes and it really quietens down, and there's this great big clangy sort of bang chord, and then underneath you can still hear. So it's a challenge really for any record player to record that sort of thing faithfully, or to reproduce that kind of thing faithfully. It's not like 180 gram vinyl. I doubt, I'm pretty sure that you might be able to find 180 gram vinyls, but my copy is just sort of average thickness, about 120 grams, something like that. Haven't weighed it. As I was talking about in the video that I made about auto-change record players, if your record player is not set up correctly, in particular the cartridge, the further you go towards the centre of the record, the more distortions can be picked up. If it's played too often by a cartridge that isn't correctly set up, that can introduce more and more distortions into the record, all right? And by golly, does your cartridge need to be, and your tone arm need to be really good if you're not going to pick up any kind of extra distortion in the piano that, you know, that wasn't there when it was originally being recorded, particularly, as I say, towards the end of each side. Side one, I found a particularly challenging side. It's fine for the first sort of, you know, maybe 10, 11 minutes or so, but it's nearing the end of the record, the chords are being, you know, and the sort of volume of the piano is such that it can create a kind of resonates with any dust in there. You can sort of hear the dust singing along. Sorry, I'm not being very eloquent in describing it, but as I say, you really need something like, you know, what I was talking about earlier, really, a very good record player, a P5, a P3 will play this record player, but your cartridge needs to be, I would say, a fine line cartridge to get the best out of this record. Something like an Autophon 2M Black moving magnet, maybe the cheaper 2M Bronze, but that will sound brighter. Perhaps something like, you know, the Riga Exact. I've played this on my Riga Exact when I had it fitted to my RP8 that I've got over here, and found it's made a better fist of things. If your turntable is slightly off speed, that the sort of, it's a treble rich record in the first place, it's going to burble. Solo piano is particularly difficult for record players to reproduce. So, you know, you've really got to make sure that the platter on your turntable is spinning round at the correct speed and that it doesn't deviate from that speed. In my experience, I've found it's done better on the record players I've had where I've been able to fit the TTPSU to it. That's the external power supply that also regulates the record speed. On the P1s, P2s and basic P3s, you have to flip the belt up yourself, and those are not as speed accurate. They're very speed accurate, but they're not as speed accurate as having the external power supply. And again, you know, I'm talking Rega, but you'll find similar power supply issues and speed issues on whatever brand of record player that you choose. All right, but whatever, even if you do have to buy the CD, I have got the CD actually. It's one that I just love playing in the car as well. If you've got the CD of this, or yeah, it doesn't sound particularly good being streamed, particularly just on the speakers of a device that you're listening to. If you can sort of run it through your hi-fi, then you'll get better results. But yeah, whatever you listen to it on, listen to it. Okay? It really does deserve, I know that it's now, nearly 50 years old, is it? Yeah, it will be 50 years old next year. It's stunning. Listen to it, and you'll find yourself, unlike most jazz and improvised albums, you'll find yourself going around listening, humming little bits from it as you go about the rest of your day. It's really good. All right, I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Oh, remember to like, subscribe, share if you dare. Consider a thanks down below. I really need a super thanks down below. I've got a very ill Mac to support. All right, see you later. Bye bye.